kind of get that very innately, and then but through practicing that and reading about it does come, and it makes the battles, it makes what we are trying to understand that's going on for that young person a lot easier. So yeah, I think just to kind of tie up some of that, we know that emotional understanding is impacted in autistic young people, and that's regardless of their IQ. And what I found is teaching emotional vocabulary and linking that to how it feels in the body is really important. And there's a lot of work going on in schools across the board doing that on a much deeper level than what had been done before. But our autistic young people, they may label something, for example, as stress and anxiety. Actually, it's excitement, but it feels the same in the body. So they can't differentiate that. And that's where some of that explicit teaching is needed, using examples that the young person is familiar with. So if they really love going on roller coasters, for example, you're bringing that in, but you're starting with the young person and not just taking, generic scenarios or generic pictures of people on the internet that they've never met before, or symbols of people looking very happy. We don't look like that when we're happy. So it's about, kind of really teaching that, and that's it could be lifelong, but chipping away at that and explaining that. And usually it can be helpful to do that quite soon after an experience, good or bad. Well, there's some of that residual emotion still going on, but the young person's more regulated and feels there's a trust there. Whereas what was going on there? Be curious, going back to that playfulness, that pace model. What was going on for us there? What I was seeing in you was this. Were you getting a sense of that? How did that feel in your body, and body mapping it? Things like that. So sorry, I was just saying that one of the most helpful kind of anecdotes or examples of how we need to understand how autistic people understand emotions and then verbalize that to us is that they are often more associative than contextualized. This example that I had heard has always stuck with me about a young person not liking baked potatoes. And they had a bit of a phobia of baked potatoes. So whenever he was in a situation where he felt that and he felt frightened, he would scream, "I hate baked potatoes," even though there was no baked potatoes around. But he associated how he felt with the potatoes. So I think that if anything, that's a good example, and take it away and share it with staff in schools when we're talking about how we help our young people understand what's going on in their body and labeling that accurately. So I hope that, again, I'm conscious that there's a huge kind of meaty subjects, but hopefully giving you kind of threads or nuggets that you can go away and explore a bit more. And then the last slide from Craig and I were just really some useful links, as I'd said, for you to kind of follow up on. Call Scotland are a charity who support speech and language therapy, but really focusing on kind of assistive technology. That can be very helpful for our young people, for staff to kind of get some training, and they also have a kind of lending library as well. So they would be a useful kind of resource to tap into if we were looking for support and communication. Studio 3 I don't feel like I'm going to do them justice explaining really who they are, but we work very closely with Studio 3, who are a team of exceptional people looking at supporting behaviour and kind of crisis management, and their website is full of free webinars for parents and for education practitioners, but they also have opportunities that you can sign up to as well. So for both parents and schools, that it would be a really good resource. Zones of regulation, again, you may have heard of them, but that kind of approach looks at supporting emotional regulation. And then obviously you've got a PACE model, which I touched upon earlier. So I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Deborah, and to Craig as well. Hopefully loads of information to take away there and to think more about. And we will be sharing the slides from today, so don't worry about writing down these links or anything. We'll send them all out to everybody, so you'll get them that way. I think one of the things that we definitely wanted to talk about, and that I know a few people have asked questions about throughout the session today, is about what to do if things aren't going right. So obviously we've got loads of examples there from Deborah and from Craig about things that might help, things to think about, things to talk to the school about. But there are lots of steps that you can take if things aren't in place at the moment, or if things aren't going as you would like them to be. So the first thing that we always recommend, if you haven't done it already, or even if you have and it hasn't worked the first time, is to ask for a meeting. You know, schools are very busy places, and sometimes that conversation at the school gates gets forgotten among 100 other things. So asking for a sort of more formalised, can we sit down and talk about my child and their needs? I'm really concerned about XYZ. You know, I'm really concerned about how they're coping with the sensory environment. I'd really like to talk about getting them a written support plan. Sitting down and having that conversation, either with your child's class teacher or with the person at school that's responsible for additional support for learning, would always be the first step. After that, you can escalate and ask to speak directly to the head teacher, and following that, there's more things that you can do too. So there's a couple of things on there. First of all, putting things into writing, getting things written down, and whether that's in the form of a written plan or just in an email thread about, you know, making sure that your concerns are clear and documented, means that if you then do need to escalate your concerns any further, there's ways that you can do that. As we touched upon earlier, it's actually your local authority that are responsible for planning and providing your child support. So if you are not sure, you've tried with the school, things aren't working as you'd like them to be, and the first thing that we'd always recommend to do after you've spoken with the school, after you've spoken with the head, is to get in touch directly with your local authority. We have a page on our website with all the local authority contacts that we have, and that can be a way to kind of escalate. There's more steps you can take beyond that. There's things like making a formal complaint. There's also mediation. There's independent adjudication. There are plenty of options available to you. Seeking advocacy that we mentioned before can sometimes be helpful if you feel like your views aren't getting heard, or your child's views aren't getting heard. We've got a whole page on our website all about it. And as Jen's mentioned a couple of times, if you've got a specific situation, and if you've tried a few steps and you want to talk about what you could do next, that's where we can come in and we can talk to you about that. On our helpline, we can think about the things that you've tried and maybe what else might help in the future. I realise that we are now at the 9 o'clock time. So before we go any further, I'm going to just put that poll in the chat again to see where we are, just so that we get a sense of where we're up to. And then, of course, if you need to head off quickly, you can do. If you've got the time to stay, we do have those pre-prepared questions that we mentioned earlier. So if you are available to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes, you're certainly welcome to. But first of all, Jen, could you share that the end of the session poll to everybody, please?
There we are. That should be with you now.
So if you could all have another vote. Again, it's completely anonymous, but how do you feel now? Are you feeling more confident than you were earlier? Hopefully that is the case. We'll give you a couple of minutes to put in your answers, and hopefully we'll see that there's been an improvement in everybody feeling a little bit more confident today. How are we doing, Jen? I can't see the poll, so.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think that looks like we've got most people responded. So I'll give you another couple of seconds and then I will share the poll for you. All right, I think that seems to be everybody. So if I end and then share results.
How are we looking?
Yeah, so it looks like, yeah, quite a big increase in the confident side, so 73% now confident, 5% very confident. We've still got a couple there that may benefit from either kind of taking a look at some of the pages that we've shared or contacting contacting the team in other ways. But yeah, it looks like there was a good increase there.
Oh, fab, that's great to hear. So, like I say, we are going to answer a couple of questions now, but I do realise that it's the 9 o'clock time. So you are welcome to stay on. If you need to go, this session is recorded, so you will get a copy of this and it'll include this extra bit with questions too. So totally up to you, but I'm going to jump straight into the first question. So
as we said earlier, I'll just say that we mentioned that we're going to do these questions. So a lot of the questions and some of the common questions that we do get is about my child is masking at school and is exhausted when they're getting home, and just how can I explain this to the school in a better way?
Yeah, definitely. So if I was speaking to you on the helpline, we could definitely talk about this in more detail, but masking, for anybody that's not aware, is the term used for when neurodivergent people or autistic people are sort of hiding and covering up and maybe repressing some of their natural reactions so that they are fitting into the environment. So it's maybe not clear to the people around them that they're finding a situation particularly stressful or particularly uncomfortable. It's obviously a very energy sapping thing to do. Some people do it naturally, some people sort of choose to do it, or they decide that they want to do it in those situations, but it can have a big impact on how a child's feeling at school. I'm not autistic myself, and I think having to spend all that energy to pretend to be something or to look a certain way or for your facial expressions, it's a lot of energy that a neurotypical person isn't spending at school, and they can focus on other things. So if that's something that's happening at school, and I know we hear from families quite often where their child appears to be fine and school staff are saying, well, they seem all right at school, they don't seem upset, they're not having meltdowns in front of us, so what are we supposed to do? We know that that's a thing that happens often, and having that conversation about masking and talking to the school specifically about it, what it is and what it looks like, can be really valuable. Not all school staff will have a deep or sort of long-standing awareness of autism. Certainly terminology like masking is quite new to a lot of people. So certainly don't be afraid to go into a school, especially if it's maybe a mainstream school with less experience, to have that conversation. Do you know what masking is? What does it look like for your child? Can your child sort of explain how they're feeling? Talking to the school about the 24-hour life of your child. So how do they feel in the morning before school? What happens when you're in the car on the way there? When they're at school, how do they feel, in their lesson time versus at break time versus at lunchtime? When they get home, how do they feel? It's about that 24-hour life that your child is living, and how everybody can support them in the best way. Wellbeing and mental health certainly is something that falls under additional support for learning, so it is something that the school needs to be working on. The same way that if anything else was happening at home, you would expect the school to be supportive of that. If you were facing a bereavement, or if there was lots of stress going on at home, if you were unwell at home, or your parent was unwell and you were very stressed in school, whatever is going on in your home environment, as much as that isn't directly school's responsibility, necessarily, the impact of those things happening at home on their time at school is something that you can talk about, and something that there can be support put in place for. Like we've mentioned, all those things about maybe having a quiet space, thinking about the sensory needs of the child. Do they have somewhere where they can feel safe to unmask? Do they have staff at school that they trust, that they can talk to about how they're feeling? And that long-term sense of how can they be encouraged and feel safe to not need to mask when they're at school. Deborah, Craig, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that from your perspective.
I think you've answered it very well, Beth. I think it just goes back to really understanding the the experience of that young person and validating that as much as possible, even if you don't understand it, but to really listen to what the young person's telling you, and maybe not, that can be telling you verbally or telling you through their behaviour and their presentation. Yeah, getting that, going back to that stress reduction plan, and sometimes it can be, the smallest adjustments that can make the biggest impact. But I think we have to validate how the young person's feeling, and that can be, most helpful at times.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much. So the next question, Sharon, I'm going to ask you this as if you're on the helpline. So my child's got a transition coming up. So perhaps they're moving from nursery to primary, or primary to secondary, or from secondary onwards. And they're worried about managing with that big change, with that transition. What can their school do to help them with that? What should they be doing?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I think it can be really, the run up to any child starting school or moving from a different school, or, can be a really exciting step for some. But for many autistic children and young people, they'll find that change very scary and overwhelming, and may find, it difficult to transfer certain skills into different situations. And they're also, which we'll be aware of, is there's many that have maybe complex sensory issues, become really anxious with unfamiliar noises, smells, lights. And I think the school environment is obviously, in a whole, is one of the big things. So it can be tough to know how to help. But I think the most important thing is about being the opportunity for you and your child to be given to share your views through that transition planning. And that transition planning clearly would start as 12 months prior to the normal practices, 12 months prior to them moving or changing school, and making sure that you ask the lead professional who's coordinating that the information that's been held and passed over, to make sure that it's absolutely shared with the new school. If there's any written plans that's already in place, any planning plans, make sure that all of the types of supports that they're getting now is shared with the new school. And I think then also we hear a lot of for autistic pupils that they do sometimes have enhanced transitions, and that can sometimes make a really big difference to them. That means extra visits to the school before that they've got a chance to meet the staff, familiar with the environment. And I think it also allows them the opportunity to make sure that they get to know and how it's going to work for them already in advance, because I think that's what can be really scary to some of them, is that they just don't know what they're going into. And I think part of that planning is, again, it could be for some of the children to say, okay, well, how is this going to work better for them? Parents being able to say what might work for them, or the teachers are able to share what might work for them. So it's about, can they take photos of the place on the key people that they're going to be involved in their transition, creating a photo book, so that can maybe help relieve any anxiety. You can talk about things about maybe a soft start coming into the school when they first start, for the first few days or weeks, just to try and alleviate that concern and the expectation that's required. Deborah mentioned earlier on about, the visual supports. It's so important to reinforce them, and also verbal communication for them. And they can be, for a particular, with change, if they find it really difficult, it can take them longer to process these things. As an example, if you're using visual supports, try and explain about things like the bus journey to school, making sure that you've used pictures, the whole process, including the school. And I think as well, it's about, talking about timetables, because even when they're changing, even from their nursery and play-based, and they're moving just to P1, and then more particularly from primary to high school, there is obviously a big change, and it's about what's going to be in that environment. Maps of the schools, that's where that enhanced transition will be so important, to allow them to understand. And I think part of it as well is it's encouraging them even to do a countdown of the schools that they're going, so they're understanding it a bit more. Some of the children might benefit from having social stories to let them know what to expect in their new school. And I think as well as one of the things that I always find that's quite helpful to explain to parents is, trying to make sure that the teachers are preparing in their current setting of where they are for that change, and they're talking about it a lot. It's not just when they're going to visit their new environment, and that can be quite good. And I think, you know, we've obviously touched on anxiety can be such a big thing for them regarding the change, and making sure that they've got lots of opportunities to ask questions about the concerns. That's both the children and parents, if the children can express that, to see if it will benefit for them. I think as well as setting aside times for relaxation techniques if they can, if that's part of their planning things, or if you feel that they're able to express things that work for them already, that might be, you know, really beneficial to just make sure that that transition can be as smooth as possible. So I hope I've been able to explain that. I'm not sure, Beth, if you want to add anything, or Deborah, Wade.
No, I think it's great. Craig, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think you've kind of covered everything I was thinking of there. Again, kind of referring back to what we were talking about before, visuals I feel are so important, and I love the idea that you were saying there about a photo book, something like that as well, to kind of really support in that, something that the young person can take away with them, they can talk to, they can really show it off and share it with others as well, would